Hello and welcome to the Strong Suit Podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every single episode, I feature a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And I am so excited to talk with my guest today, Michael Winnick. Now, let me tell you a bit about Michael and the business that he has started. And I think you'll find a couple things pretty fascinating, as I do. So Michael's based in Chicago. He is the head of a company called dscout, and we'll talk about what the D means in a couple minutes. What's fascinating about dscout is this is a research tool that captures the thoughts and the behaviors and reactions of potential customers or existing customers in the moments they happen. So if you're looking for insight into your customers, I mean really qualitative, deep insight, whether it's text or video or pictures or whatever, and then you want to have it analyzed to tell you what the heck you should do with it all, Michael and his team at dscout are the folks to talk to, again, based in Chicago. He started dscout in 2012, so coming up in about 5 years. And what's interesting to me and what's fascinating about this business that Michael's building is that he hires people that have a passion for understanding what makes people tick. It's not often that I have guests on where the DNA of the people is so clear and so consistent, but I get a sense that that's the case at dscout. And for the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk with Michael about how he's done that. So with that, let me welcome my guest, Michael Winnick. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing great, Jeff. That was a great intro.
Well, it's great to have you on the show. I'm so fascinated by this concept because as a former marketer, you can get insights now using technology in ways that we never could, back in the old days. So before we get to that, maybe just share a little bit of your backstory, just for 60 seconds, like kind of what led you to decide to start dscout in 2012?
Sure. Yeah, I was actually involved in another company based in Chicago called Gravity Tank, which is a kind of IDEO-like innovation firm, which I ran and grew for a number of years. And kind of through that experience, just had a deep passion for doing primary research and seeing people really as the starting point and ending point for building great products and services. And so we actually spun dscout out of Gravity Tank, and then I stepped down as the managing director of Gravity Tank to run dscout and then to build it into its own business.
Fantastic. Very good. And what was the kind of the key insight? When I talk with entrepreneurs, there's always a key insight that kind of leads them to the hypothesis behind the business. What was the key insight for you and dscout?
Sure. I think there are a couple very kind of interrelated points. I think maybe a few which are very obvious and maybe some that aren't so obvious. I think the first was kind of really built on the belief that I already said, which is this incredible value of being close to understanding people and believing that understanding is very core to being successful in modern business. Sounds pretty obvious, but I think actually very few companies do that well.
Yep.
So that was number one. Number two was the realization that mobile phones and mobile technology and now other forms of technology create an opportunity to completely change the way that we do that and make that practice more scalable, more efficient, and more powerful. And then I think the third is actually that maybe the less obvious is that actually in a world where we have access to so much data and behavioral data, that we actually need this other type of data, much more kind of human-based, what we call kind of in context or context-based data. We really need that to make sense of all of the ones and zeros that we're collecting. And so while companies actually have access to a tremendous amount of data about how people behave kind of with their products and services, they actually need the other side to really make sense of it. And so we see companies often get more insulated with the amount of data that they have as opposed to actually closer to the people they're trying to serve.
Fantastic. That's great background. So now let's shift to the people part of dscout. For starters, just how's the organization structured? How many people on the team?
Sure. So we are just over 65 people. So, and we're organized very similar to SaaS, kind of I would say a fairly standard SaaS organization. there's me, my kind of partner in crime is our COO. So we kind of work very closely together. And then we have a sales team, a product team, an engineering team, a success team, an operations team. We have just brought in an HR lead who's fantastic this year, which has been a huge growth.
Yeah, when you get
been
to
a huge lever for the company.
When you get to 65, 70 people, you definitely need that, right?
Absolutely. And then we also have a kind of a managed services team as well. So that's the basic structure of the company.
So the question I'm dying to ask, and I'm sure the listeners are as well, is what is the origin of the name dscout?
Sure. Well, I think it was funny in the very early days, we really liked the idea of scouting and this idea that research shouldn't be this sterile, boring, kind of antiseptic thing, that it's actually about discovering things. And so we wanted to have a name that was very kind of aspirational in terms of what it was saying about what you're doing and also the people that you're working with. And so we liked the word scout a lot, and then we looked at a lot of variations of that, and then also I think selected the D really with this idea of standing for a few things that we really like. Discovery, which I already mentioned, design, and also a focus on digital. So
it really was the perfect letter, right?
Yes, it turned out to be a great letter. It was also at a time where had we picked something like iScout or eScout, those would have been really dated. And so I think by kind of going our own paths, I think the name still sounds kind of fresh and interesting and raises a lot of questions, right? What does that mean? And that's actually perfect for what we do. Absolutely.
Lead customers into the sales conversation. So
right.
What have you gone so far as to codify the DNA of the organization? In other words, if you were hiring a person tomorrow, what are some of the non-negotiables aside from skill set and competencies that you would insist upon?
Sure. Absolutely. That's a project that we've been kind of embarking on for the last quarter or two as we've scaled. I think we've done a good job of doing that intuitively. But certainly for the next stage of growth, you need to take things that are intuitive and you need to start kind of writing them down, right? And kind of creating ways to understand them. And so we focus on, I think, some things that are very expected and you would kind of expect in any kind of high growth organization. So for instance, drive and ambition. I think that that might be a very obvious one, but I think it's just super important to ensure that your team is looking for and encouraging people that come in and they want to change things. They have a goal, they want to accomplish things. So I think that one's very obvious, but some of them that are very much related to our mission. So for instance, curiosity is something that we really try to engender in the culture. And we want to make sure that we're talking to and bringing people into the company that are curious and not kind of in an idle curiosity, but kind of a disciplined curiosity in how they pursue things, obviously.
So like a very methodical kind of person, right?
Exactly. So for instance, a very simple interview question might be, what are you reading? What podcasts are you listening to? And if the answers to those are nothing, that tells us something about the curiosity of the people that, we're interviewing, right? So people, if we simply ask in an interview, I think a technique that you often mention is turning the interview over to a participant, right?
Yeah, right.
How curious are they? Have they done research about us? Have they downloaded our app or service? Are they great? Are they actually curious enough? Do they take the next steps? Or are they basically like, no, I don't have any questions?
Yeah.
You're like, you have to have questions. It's impossible that you don't have questions right now.
It never ceases to amaze me that candidates don't have questions, but it would seem like, Michael, in your business and the type of DNA, you're looking for, people that are passionate about figuring out other people, right? And what makes them tick. If that person doesn't come in with questions, and I don't mean bullshit prescribed questions, but really curiosity invoking questions, that's a pretty good indicator you got the wrong person.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think that one of the other things, which it sounds almost obvious, but I really like to try to get people to simply tell me why they embarked on the career path that they did. And it is amazing how often people that we end up hiring say, well, I really love people. That's their opening line. And so I went into sales because of blah, or I went into marketing because of X.
Right.
And it's almost that when I find people that really resonate with what they're doing, that often comes out right at it's the fountainhead of how they've thought about their career.
Yeah. You can almost end the interview early if they don't come from that type of DNA, right?
Right.
Right. Now, tell us a little about how you learned to hire. I know that sounds like a strange question, but a lot of people that maybe a mentor taught them or they just learned at the School of Hard Knocks. You've added 65 people to the team. Where along the line did you learn how to recruit people?
Sure. Well, I think I think that there's been successive waves of that as the company has scaled. I think as a CEO, you have to shed your skin every year or two and try to reinvent yourself, right?
Yep.
And so that's shifted a lot kind of in the last year. In the early days, obviously, I was doing all of the recruiting and kind of the hiring. And so, and that was there was obviously a major selling component to that because as a small organization that's a spin out without high profile funding, right?
Yep.
You really face a challenge. You have to sell your vision.
Yep.
And I screwed up a lot in the early days, certainly, in terms of sometimes forcing a fit or mismatching because I needed a skill. I think, so actually I kind of learned pretty early to turn, and so that was the early days. I think once we kind of went through that phase, as we started to bring other people into the hiring process, I really made sure just to follow a few simple rules to make sure we ask people a lot of questions about their backgrounds, some of the things we've already discussed, and then to make sure that we're not just getting a tepid yes or interest on both sides, that there has to be a high degree of enthusiasm inside our company and vice versa, right?
Yep.
So another thing I really try to encourage my teams as well as participants is like, there's no room for coyness in the hiring process.
Right. Right.
We don't be coy, a lot of times people are holding their cards so close to their chest and you're just like, we need to know that you want to work here. Okay.
Right.
So
you got to want it,
can't
right?
say that to us, it doesn't work.
But to play devil's advocate, how do you
Sure.
reconcile that with the fact that the market is as tight as it is? We're at the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. You want people who are engaged and interested, but they have so many choices, right? And they're probably working statistically. They're probably employed. So how do you reconcile that?
It's interesting. I think that the tight labor market, and this might be somewhat of a benefit of being in Chicago. Certainly, there's a lot of competition here, but we find that people are excited about what we're doing and the company that we're building. And certainly, there's certain positions where we feel the shortage, and it's just hard to find people.
What's an example?
We have to decide, like a QA automation engineer.
Got it. Okay.
For instance, that's a kind of a pretty technical role. It's hard to find people for. So sometimes for roles like that, we might look for a while, and then we have to make some decisions around, can we find the right candidate for this? And if the answer is no, can we train somebody internally? Can we pay them to go take a bunch of classes and go learn the skill?
Yep.
Can we shift our hiring plan around? So certain times we have to redirect. I mean, I think that especially as now, a lot of CEOs of startups say, I've got to be involved in the hiring decision for every person at a certain phase, and I think that, for me, I've stepped back from that because I really want my teams to feel empowered to make decisions, but I still make them come to me or our CEO and really make an argument as to why they want that person for the role. I think it's just, there is a risk of satisficing, bringing in the first best candidate you see, because they feel the pressure of having to fill a role, right?
So what do you do in cases where you just vehemently disagree with the candidate that they want to go with? Do you support the team and say, I don't agree, but I'm behind you? Or do you try to change their mind?
Normally, I think that I try to evaluate the kind of the risk and the level of the employee, right? So if the whole team is fully behind somebody and they're in a certain role or position, and I might have some questions or concerns, I'll go with where they are.
Right.
If the role is certainly like a new capability or position in the company, or it's kind of a leadership role, then I usually will kind of say that this is one where I can't align behind you. I need to agree with you, right? And if I don't agree, we're not going to make the hire.
Got it.
So I
But
think
you will
it's always
intervene.
that balance. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Absolutely. So
Tell us
and I will
about.
state also
Yep.
where I want to, where I feel like it's my job as a CEO to not wait for people to come to me and say, hey, I want you to be involved in this hire or not, that I need to also be pretty clear and say, I will be involved in this, in the hire of this person. Right.
Got it.
So
I understand.
yeah.
Tell us about what you've learned along the way. You've been at this for 5-6 years, about bad hires or mishires. And you don't have to name names, but what
Sure.
in hindsight can you say, you know what, here's what I missed, here's what I should have done differently, et cetera?
Sure. I think there are a couple things that come to mind. I think one is I think that where I've seen our team do some mishiring is kind of this sounds so terrible to say, but picking people that kind of look good. Not, I don't mean physically. I just mean that they kind of, they have quote unquote the right background. And
in terms of what, be specific. What do you mean?
Sorry, that they work at companies that are kind of similar-ish to us. They whatever, they live in a part of Chicago that's similar to them, and so they kind of start hiring. Sometimes they can get caught around the trappings of a person.
Yep.
Versus actually their core capability and functions for the job. So they kind of start hiring for. So that's one that I definitely watch out for. The second, which I think I said before, is a risk, which is related to ambition and drive.
Yep.
Is I think that when you turn your hiring process over to your teams, sometimes their North Star is this person going to be a great person for me to work with?
Yeah.
Which I think is good.
It's important, but it's not as important as the person going to be successful in the role.
Exactly, but it's insufficient, right? And so sometimes what you find is that your teams are going to say, look, I want someone that I can, you've heard the drink a beer with, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that's good, right? But are they going to be great at this role, right? Yeah. Are they going to add a lot of value to the company? And so I think it's kind of keeping the weight on those things. I think other times, I think where certainly I've struggled, and I think I think all companies struggle, is kind of walking the line with finding the right line between criticality and negativity in people.
What do you mean by that?
So I think the criticality is the ability to look at a situation and to analyze what's working and what's not working, and then to be able to critically have critical thinking skills around problems, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that I think that's a really valuable skill set, but that can easily dip into negativity, which is critically looking at everything all the time, right?
Got it.
And I think that, and so I think sometimes in an interview, candidates that are critical are actually appealing, right? Wow, they really thought through this, right? They've got some great point of view, but that can slip into negativity. And I think negativity in an organization, especially startup organizations, can be really challenging because
I just want to pause there, because that's a very clear DNA from what we described earlier of the folks that are going to be successful in a business like yours, right? They still have to be optimistic, but they still have to be incredibly curious and critical thinkers. And that not everyone is that way, right? Many people are wired to be optimists, but they don't pay attention to the details and they overlook data that they don't want to see, right? And then there's plenty of people who, you're right, dig into the details, but it jades them. They become jaded, right? And you're looking for that Venn diagram, and that's a very unique characteristic.
Right. Pollyanna optimism is probably more dangerous to a startup than jaded negativity, but they're
Absolutely.
both dangerous, right? So if
Absolutely.
you're wrestling with the two, you're kind of having to balance, I think, against both of those things, right? So, I think that if your team is kind of almost blindly optimistic, then what happens is they naturally stifle bad news, right? Which you really don't want to do, right? You want to make sure, bad news is flowing in your company faster than good news.
Yep.
If you have to choose,
It kills early
right?
stage companies.
Right. So
One last question before we wrap up, Michael, and that is, how long do you give a new hire to decide if you've made the right call or whether you made a mishire for whatever reason?
I don't think we have a hard and fast rule there. It's a little bit case by case. So I'd say that when sometimes it's really obvious we just have completely missed the mark, right? So in that case, those cases are kind of easy and we'll move fairly quickly. But I'd say 3 months or something is probably the fastest that we would move in that case. I think that obviously then the question is people that you're uncertain about. And I think that my tendency is probably to be fairly patient there. I think we make a commitment to people when we bring them in. And that commitment is we've got to work through a cycle or two of, feedback, clear feedback to them, giving them a chance to improve, or at least a couple chances to improve, and then making a decision, right? So, I think that, the extreme cases are always easy, right? It's actually the gray cases that are hard to deal with, but we tend to probably be more patient. I don't think we have a firm timeline on that.
Got it. But it sounds like within 90 days, you're going to know one way or the other.
I think we'll know this person's going to do well. We're not sure what's going on with this person, right? We need to invest in figuring that out, or this isn't really a good fit. I think that, and I'd say the one exception to that I would say is in the case of negativity, negative high performers are always the most challenging to deal with, in my opinion, right? Because you're kind of right. Sometimes you're removing someone that's adding a lot of productivity, but creating a lot of cultural problems, right? So in that case, I think I've probably been too slow to pull the trigger or make a firing decision in those cases. Because I'm probably overvaluing their productivity versus kind of the productivity drag it's creating for the rest of the people they're working with.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, thank you so much for making the time. How can people learn more about dscout or get in touch with you?
Sure. People can obviously go to our website, dscout.com, learn more about what we do, and they can also reach out to me directly, michael@dscout.com.
Fantastic. Thank you again, and we look forward to watching dscout and your success.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Really enjoyed it.